Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I am Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruns, Brian Christopherson here on Wednesday. Gentlemen, yesterday we got together. We talked a little bit about the roundtable session, the opening spring press conference. Was there any holdover thoughts that you weren't able to get out that you came to the conclusion after the podcast, maybe hours later, and you thought, "Oh man, I really should have worked in this very important comment"? Anything like that? I know both of you think about work all the time, so I assume that you each have just nuggets that you're ready to share.
Are you asking if either of us had a jerk store moment? Like if we were sitting there later and thought I should have said that?
I mean, essentially.
Seinfeld tip jar. You owe money to the Seinfeld tip jar for that.
Yeah. Speaking of the Seinfeld tip jar, at some point, someone on this podcast is basically just going to walk off on a good moment, right? Like that's going to be the next thing.
We can do that. I don't know. I was going back through just kind of Mark Whipple stuff yesterday after we chatted, and just the setup. I think with the way that he's doing things, I think it just makes a lot of sense for a guy who's new to a program and trying to reshape an offense. He's adjusting to what things were called and not the other way around. They started with 2-minute drill. He's trying to build reps and libraries for his quarterbacks. I just there's a level of organization there that I'm eager to see if that bears fruit, because it seems like a good approach right now.
What about you, BC?
No, there's not one thing I woke up like in the middle of the night thinking about that I hadn't shared. I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was saying all my good thoughts last time on this podcast, and we had a technical glitch. So I don't want to. That what was lost is lost to the ages there. So that it's too late. But yeah, we can continue along.
Fair enough. There was something that there wasn't really like a way to work it in yesterday, but when I was listening to some audio, writing up on Xavier Betts, Mickey Joseph had just sort of an interesting comment on the idea of being an in-state player and how much pressure gets attached to that for certain ones. And I'm gonna put that into a story here later this week. But it is really kind of remarkable how much expectation someone like Xavier Betts will have in his career relative to what Will Nixon would have faced, or Latrell Neville, or any of these other wide receivers. Now, obviously, Betts higher rated, but it was interesting hearing Mickey talk about that, because he's also going to be very involved in the recruitment of Malachi Coleman, and he's already basically said he wants to be involved more in in-state recruiting. And so I thought that was an interesting thing that he's voiced, that I haven't really heard another Nebraska assistant coach phrase it in such a way that you kind of have to find a way to let these kids know that it's okay, that they don't have to add even more pressure to themselves, and that sometimes they have to find an outlet to get outside of the fact that they're an in-state player at Nebraska, that there's going to be more demands on them, and they have to find either the ability to say no, or a way to sort of separate that aspect of themselves with everything else that needs to be done. And so I thought that was really interesting. I'll have more on that as well, but I don't know of another assistant coach that has kind of voiced that about in-state players specifically. And that speaks to, Xavier's had a very interesting experience here already in Lincoln. I mean, he's got a cult following of people who think that he's Nebraska's best wide receiver at all times. There's the idea that he's not either A, doing enough to stay on the field, or B, is being prevented from going onto the field by all these other wide receivers. And so it's just, there's so much conversation that it's probably pretty hard for him to be ignorant of it. Like it has to seep into kind of his everyday being. And so that would get really difficult, but you're certainly not hearing that or experiencing that in the same way with non-in-state kids. So like I said, I'll have more on that. You guys have any quick thoughts on that at all? I mean, I don't know if you've heard the quote, but I thought it was pretty astute, and not like that it was a really deep out of nowhere thought, but I just, as I said, haven't heard it phrased quite like that.
I mean, I do think it's true that it's important to the in-state recruiting process for Nebraska for some of these guys to sort of take off and be seen as like playmakers, but that it does connect a little bit to what you're saying in that there's an added pressure with that. Like when you talk about the metro area recruiting and you attach, which we've done in stories, I know I've done it with Xavier Betts, like, it'd be really nice if he had 828 yards this season and what that means to kids in that area watching that happen. And yeah, it is something to think about. I mean, I always think about that when guys are deciding what school to go to, in this state, when they've got options and everybody's tugging at them and, there's maybe a fear of picking elsewhere or, just knowing that once they sign up to go to Nebraska, if they commit to Nebraska, you have a target on you. Everybody you go against and are around is going to say, oh yeah, you're a Nebraska commit. I'm going to go after you. So there are a lot of layers to that we could do a whole podcast on probably.
It's unique too, I think, for skill position guys, because in recent memory, there aren't a ton of offensive skill position guys locally who have hit. A lot of guys that kind of entered with a lot of star power and hype behind their names, in part because they're local kids that just haven't had the type of careers I think a lot of people would have. So I think there's a lot of hope placed on Xavier Betts that he can be the guy that can definitely hit there. And it's, I mean, we've seen flashes of it. I mean, that the catch run against Penn State, what he did against Northwestern last year, the talent's there. It's just a matter of the consistency. And I think that I think Mickey's right, but I think it's prime time for a local kid at a wide receiver spot or running back spot, where it was almost kind of a yearly thing for a long time for those guys to hit and kind of be counted on.
Absolutely. All right, so let's dive into kind of our topic of the day here. We'll start with we'll just go reverse here. Michael Bruntz, what is a position battle that you are paying close attention to that is not quarterback for Nebraska this spring?
There's a lot of them. I think probably the one for me is who's going to kind of shake out in the secondary and just win starting jobs. I mean, I think as much as people, want to say that Quentin Newsome maybe is not in the mix for, doesn't have it locked down. I mean, I think that he, does. I mean, I think he's going to be a starter for Nebraska. But we don't know the other spots. We aren't going to know much about Omar Brown until maybe the second part of spring at that cornerback spot. You got Tommy Hill, Marquise Buford's going to play somewhere. Deshaun Singleton, another new guy at safety. I mean, I'm kind of grouping them both together, but there's a lot of snaps to be had there. And that to me is, and Eric Chenander said it too, is a huge priority for the defensive staff in the spring. So we'll see how that all kind of, works itself out this spring. But I think that's a really important position battle, especially when you look at, the last few years, Nebraska really hasn't had much turnover in its secondary. It's been a lot of the same faces. So a lot of opportunity there.
What about you for BC?
I think replacing Jojo is talked about all the time, but it's for obvious reasons, because when he was missing the last 2 weeks of the season, it wasn't the same defense. And he was such just a stud last year. I mean, he was a guy who maybe if you go back 3 years ago, I know Eric Chenander would say he played cowboy a little bit too much, where he was trying to make every play and do stuff outside of what his job was. And if you think back to sort of those comments from Jojo in his younger years, now you maybe apply that responsibility of that position and all that it takes to play it well to guys who are sort of the same age Jojo was when he was struggling, and they have to pick it up fast, like Javen Wright and Isaac Gifford. And Chris Kolarovich is sort of a wild card there. I went back and listened to Chenander a little bit. And he talked about, we got to just see what he can do in coverage. We know he can play good around the ball and be good against the run, but that's the part I don't know about him yet. We know he's a great athlete, but we'll see. So the search is on, and I just hope Javen Wright in particular gets a healthy offseason. And I know the blood clots was a serious thing, and I'm glad that seems to have passed, and that's the most important thing. But I was so excited about that guy when writing about him as a recruit and his dad, and how his dad, Toby, basically trained him since, he's like 5 years old, not in a bad way, just like challenging him every day to get better and stuff. And he loved it. And he's a freak athlete. He just needs good health. So that spot sticks out to me. And the other one I'd say is, we heard Alante Brown's name pop up. I think I said this last time. I'm interested in that crop of like 7 or 8 receivers from the last 3 classes, which like 3 or 4 sort of move to the front of that group and maybe even bust a door down and get into the rotation and change the way we're looking at it.
Mickey Joseph said he needs 9 receivers. Like 9 is the number that he wants. I assume that's essentially a 3 deep across the what is it? The X, the Y, and the Z, I guess. I don't remember how they label their receivers exactly, but they have the 2 outside and the 1 inside. And so he basically said we got to get to 9. And he said that in reference to actually Victor Jones Jr. and why he's not putting a lot of expectation or responsibility or anything really with Victor Jones Jr. because he feels like they already have guys that should be ahead of him that Victor can use this spring to just kind of get his feet wet and use next fall on the scout team. I mean, it felt like he was setting up the idea that most of these freshman wide receivers, Bonner, Crawford, Victor Jones Jr., they're all just headed to a redshirt because he wants those other 9. He feels like he's got experienced wide receivers. He wants those other 9 to pretty much emerge out of that older crop. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. That goes a little deeper, I think, than what we have sort of become accustomed to. I think we kind of clump receiver and talk about it in waves of 6 more than 9, but that's kind of the number that Mickey Joseph mentioned. For me, this is kind of an odd spot because it's, in theory, Casey Rogers has it when he's healthy, but he hasn't really been healthy for the last year. I am really kind of fascinated who's going to play opposite of Ty Robinson on that other side of the defensive line, assuming Ty Robinson has one of the end spots. It sure feels like they need Mosai Newsome to come along, but Ruquan Buckley had a really nice spring last year. He's someone I'm kind of curious about. Either of those guys get much run. If you guys have listened to the Mike Dawson audio yet, what can we kind of look at in terms of that other defensive line spot with Casey Rogers out right now?
I would say this. Oh, go ahead, Browns.
I was going to say, I asked Eric Chenander specifically about the younger defensive lineman, and, he was very general in his comments, kind of talked about how those guys need to be patient because, it's not a spot where you play right away, which I thought was interesting given the fact that you're probably going to need to count on some of those guys this year. But
there's no one left.
I know. And that's why depth there's, kind of a challenge. But I was from his comments, I think they're being very patient with Jalen Weaver, with Ruquan Buckley. Marquise Black is another guy that has been on the roster for a couple of years that we haven't heard much from. So I based on his comments, was not expecting those guys to be like immediately in the conversation as of the first practice on Monday. I didn't mean to cut you off, BC. What did Mike Dawson say?
No, I think they have this. They said the same thing basically. That was the general summation from Dawson. Was not a lot is known yet. Like if they can, if one of or two of them are going to help, it's going to have to be shown going forward. It isn't something like on this date you can say like, yeah, Marquise Black is like close to being that guy. So yeah, they need huge springs from a couple of those guys. Patience is part of it because some of them are only like second year D linemen, and it is tough to, I think, sometimes work your way into the rotation to like your third or fourth season in the trenches. But I don't know, from a depth standpoint, I feel like they need someone to join Nash And Mike Dawson even said, I don't count Nash like in that group that's arrived yet. Like I know Nash is maybe he is ahead in the conversation from the others, but he's still not like a Ben Stilley type guy on the D line who's been here for 5 years. And that's where when Damian Daniels said he was leaving, I was like, that's my concern spot for this defense, because this league, how it is. If you do not have that grown 22, 23-year-old man in the interior of your defense, it can be very difficult sometimes. And that's I still think they need that in the portal.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And maybe even more frustrating, Damian Daniels didn't get an invite to the combine, right? So his chances of getting drafted seem like they have slipped a little bit, and that's someone that at the very least could have been really usable. Not just Nebraska, but if he had entered the portal, I imagine he would have been a pretty sought after commodity last year. All right. None of us mentioned the offensive line. Is that because we really don't have a great indication of what's happening up there? You don't have Teddy Prohaska. He's out with an injury. You don't have Turner Corcoran. He's out with an injury. Cam Jurgens is gone. Matt Sichterman is gone. Bryce Benhart had a real big struggle at right tackle, lost his job and got it back after an injury. It just sort of feels like the entire offensive line is just one giant position battle. Is that sort of the read you guys have on this, BC?
Yeah, it's a tricky to begin with, and Donovan Raiola, and I'm not saying this is a knock on him, he's just not one he's not gonna gab your ear off about this guy and that guy. And so if you're searching for clues right now, good luck on all those fronts with a coach who's not going to just say a ton, and probably because he also doesn't know a ton yet about what he has, and that's fair to him. I mean, like I think they need, just on the outside looking in, they need Kevin Williams or Hunter Anthony to hit, like at least one of those guys, because that really sort of gives you a bridge to some other guys developing too. And obviously Latovsky is sort of an interesting wild card. They had Hickson and Piper working at center the first day. We know that. And Corcoran's name popped up immediately from Frost as when he gets healthy, that could be an option there too. So that Corcoran center thing seems very real to me. And I sort of envision it happening that way. I mean, maybe I'll be surprised, but I sort of think they're angling toward him at center if he gets healthy, when he gets healthy, and then figuring out the pieces around him.
Bruns, what have you kind of picked up with the offensive line so far early? Like,
yeah,
it's pretty quiet. Have to read a lot of tea leaves.
It feels really incomplete. I mean, you have guys that you are assuming are going to be in your top five, out for the spring. So I don't think we're going to really know about that group until we get into, pretty far into fall camp about who's going to be able to help. And I did think it was interesting that Donovan Raiola said, it always seems like rotation is a very popular topic of conversation when it comes to the offensive line. He said, look, if we've got 8 guys that can help you, we're going to play 8 guys. If there's somebody that can help you win, you're not going to leave them sitting on the bench. So I think that has to be attractive to guys that are angling for playing time, starting jobs, etc. It's just that, with Corcoran out, with Prohaska out, it just seems like, you don't really know what your top 5 is going to be when we're sitting here on Wednesday, March 2nd. So it's still TBD. I guess we also didn't hit on running back, which also feels similar in a way to just a giant mashup of cars trying to win that race.
What? So it's interesting because I think everyone would agree that he played well last year when given that opportunity. What do you think the ideal role is for Ramir Johnson? Or is that kind of hard to say because we don't know quite yet what the Mark Whipple Scott Frost mashup is supposed to look like?
Yeah. I think Ramir can be I think he can be a 1A back, and I know there's some people who don't think that. That's fine. He's got to prove that he can stay healthy and be durable, and that's a big part of being a 1A back. And that's what he has to answer now going forward. There's things about him that he does so smoothly, though, that other guys have to prove to me they can do. Like, he knows the offense, I feel like, inside and out better than all the others. And you saw that Yant was still struggling with that last year. Yant's got all the tools in the world that could make him just blow up and be dynamite, but he's got to figure all that other stuff out. But there was things like Ramir did. I remember turning to one of you guys in the press box. I think it was a road game. There was like a bad screen pass to him, and he kind of went up and like one-handed it a little bit behind him and just took it in stride and got like 7 yards. And it's little plays like that where I saw that guy had like a calmness about him. Like I've been doing this all my life. And he felt like he was at home. You could tell, like, playing this game at this level. And so I'm excited to see where he can take that and bounce off of it. And I think Brian Applewhite's pretty excited about him too. So I'm just saying people shouldn't run off to say, like, what about this guy and that guy, and just immediately assume that Ramir is going to get passed over, because I think Mark Whipple liked a lot of what he saw on tape. And I think Applewhite did too, just judging from his early comments.
I think the best that Nebraska's offense looked the entire year was in the Michigan game, largely in the second half. But a part of why I think that is Ramir was so unbelievably dangerous as a receiver in that game, whether it was on, some quick dump off passes or when they snuck him out of the backfield on what might have been one of the better throws of Adrian's career on that wheel route. In the second half. I think it was the third quarter. And so, and that was a huge moment in the game, because I want to say that was a third or a fourth down play call. Like, I mean, they just got some really big production from Ramir as this kind of pass catching back. And so I guess if I sort of view Nebraska devoid of having the traditional feed them 20 sometimes a game running back, I don't mind the idea of Ramir Johnson being your starter if he can be really dangerous and keep defenses honest by just being a pass catcher out of the backfield. I mean, it's sort of like an extension of the handoff in that swing passing game, if that's something Casey Thompson can do. And so, assuming that it's Casey Thompson, I suppose. But I really do feel like he provides an asset outside of the box that I don't know that any of their other running backs do. Now, maybe Anthony Grant can, and maybe A.J. Allen. I haven't seen him. Other than highlights, I can't really say. But I don't think Yant is going to be as dangerous as a receiver. Stepp wasn't really particularly dangerous as a receiver at USC. But I do think that's a big part of what Ramir Johnson can bring. And I think where he just maybe comes up a little bit short, or really it's not even so much him, but with Nebraska's offensive line issues, when it got to, second and short, third and short, it just felt like Nebraska could not get anything going up front, and a bigger bodied running back might be able to help with that a little more. The reverse of that is Ramir was actually pretty good when they were inside the 5-yard line needing to score. He was a pretty good running back in goal line situations. You could argue his injury leading to the Jock Yant, stumble really probably cost Nebraska as much as anything in that Minnesota game. So I go back and forth on Ramir, but it just feels like if they're going to play with a up-tempo, a little bit more passing to your running back style offense, he's the best bet for that. What do you think, Brooks?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Mark Whipple was talking about liking backs situationally. If they, a third down back, a guy that, maybe isn't your bell cow type guy, they're going to need 3 or 4 backs. And I think Ramir Johnson is going to be one of those 3 or 4. Is he going to be the first guy out of the gates? We'll see. But I think from what you guys kind of outlined with his ability as a receiver, I think that makes him especially an attractive option on third down and in obvious passing situations where you can kind of find ways to get him open. So there's going to be a role for him in the offense. I think he's going to be a leader in that running back room. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy? And, basically, what do they see in him? I mean, that's the reality. You have new eyes looking at a guy that's been around for a while. So As you guys know, I mean, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder a little bit what role they see.
It's almost a bigger deal, like what 1B and 1C at that position can produce for this offense to me. You obviously would love a bell cow who hits like 1,000 yards or is right around there. But this offense needs to start having that second and third guy in that position group where the second guy ran for 740, the third guy ran for 580. Instead, if you look at the numbers, they're
He's going for big Russian numbers.
I'm maybe going too high, but you guys know, like if you look at last year's stats, and it's just like this is Nebraska. The top guys at like 500, second guys maybe 280 or something. It's just that's where Brian Applewhite wants at least 3. Like you said, Mickey Joseph wants at least 9. So those are your numbers. They got to hit 3 and 9 there. And I will say this: we could do a whole podcast sometime on like people we can tell from our traffic numbers are just like the fans' favorites. And I would put Jaquez Yant has entered that territory. If you tweet or write about Jaquez Yant, he is like he's the man to this fan base. It's interesting.
It is insane. He is definitely up there. We should just do a countdown someday where we try to determine that. I like that idea. I'm in on that.
Traffic getters. Yeah.
You know what people are really in on right now? Nebraska basketball. Just blowing teams up right now. Back-to-back wins. They took out Penn State on Sunday with a blowout win. Could have probably scored 100 had they kept pushing it towards the end there. And then followed it up with a second straight road win against Ohio State on Tuesday night. Bryce McGowan's had a really nice game. Alonzo Verge had a really nice game. And Nebraska played well. They played under control late. It got a little hairy there with about 3 minutes left when they just stopped scoring. But Nebraska came away with a really important win against Ohio State. It basically gives them a little bit more confidence as they head into a season finale against Wisconsin. And then they start things over in the Big Ten tournament next Wednesday. Brunts, we'll go to BC here. BC's been doing our basketball coverage. What did you kind of take away from last night's game and really these last 2 games in general following, and really be the last 3, following the news that Fred Hoiberg would be returned?
I mean, simply put, it's basically the sort of team and the style they're playing that Hoiberg, I think, expected back in exhibition season, like when they ran Colorado out of the gym. It's just it's like that just disappeared for a few months. And I know the McGowan's injury hurt on as a glue guy, but Alonzo Verge is a guy who had some ups and downs, but you're seeing in the very end of his time here at Nebraska, he's really figuring out that position much better and like how to kick it, how to be smarter with the basketball, when to force it, when not to. And guys are making the extra pass too. That's the thing that sticks out. Like it's almost like the old hockey assist from Verge. Verge is penetrating, being pretty dynamic with the basketball. He's knowing when to kick it. Another guy's, springing it out to another guy. And then there's the open shot. And they're just starting to hit. They've had a couple of games where they've been the type of shooters that Fred Hoiberg thought they were going to be. And it might just be as simple as that. You could spend a lot of words, but they got hot behind the arc for a couple of games. And that was supposed to be who they were, and they weren't for so long.
In a lot of ways, it kind of feels like both Bryce McGowan's and CJ Wilcher have come on strong here in the last, 10, 12 games. I mean, when you kind of look at how those guys have played, Brunts, do you feel like their elevation is sort of leading Nebraska's kind of ability to put a little bit more fear in these teams? I mean, it is just sometimes as simple as shooting better, but CJ Wilcher has played really well since the beginning of January.
Yeah, and you have to give Wilcher credit too, because I mean he's basically playing the 4 spot when he's in there on defense, and I mean I have to go in and look. I know for a while he was shooting almost 50% from 3-point range in conference play. I think he's down around 42, 43 maybe. I'd have to look, but he's making shots, which is, was kind of always the book on him was, look, this guy's going to be able to shoot. I think you got to give Bryce McGowan a ton of credit too. I mean, this was a guy that was getting pushed around in non-conference play against power or high major teams, and learned to play through contact. He's getting to the line. He's being aggressive offensively, and he's being the 5-star type guy that everybody thought he would be. A lot of times you have freshmen hit that wall when they get into January and February, and he's playing even better basketball than he was. So, I don't think he's going to be back next year, but I mean, I think over the last few weeks here, you're getting a chance to see the caliber of player that he truly is. And when you start looking at where he's stacking up, in Nebraska history with freshman scorers, it's pretty elite company. I mean, you're talking Ty Lue and Dave Hoppin right now. So that's good. And I'd be curious to know what you guys think. I mean, is the way that they're playing now too, I mean, it lines up with the air kind of clearing around Fred Hoiberg's future, but how much of a role is that playing in the way that the last, I guess, 70 hours or so have unfolded?
Yeah, for me, I can't speak obviously for the players, but the program in general, like once that update sort of went out and it's like, okay, Fred Hoiberg's going to be back, it almost felt like everything got like more relaxed. Obviously, they played well in those 3 games. I mean, they lost to Iowa, but they played well for about, what would you say, 35 minutes of the 40 minutes of game time there, and then just kind of let it get away in the last 5. That's a situation where it just maybe relaxed everyone that, okay, I'm not going to be here in the dying days of the Roman Empire kind of thing, I guess. I mean, they're able to just go out, play basketball. Fred Hoiberg's going to be back. There's definitely going to be changes. There's going to be changes on the roster, and all of those kinds of things. But I think there's probably a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere that, okay, our coach's job is safe. I don't think this is like breaking news, and BC covers it closer than I do, but these guys seem to like Hoiberg a lot. Like, this isn't a situation where it's a coach where people don't want to play for him. It strikes me that they like him, that they, have appreciated his efforts, and things have just kind of clicked for him here as of late.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And also, I mean, the Iowa game's interesting too that they lost because they actually played quite well in that game. I mean, they did what they wanted to do on their scouting report. They took Keegan Murray as much out of it as they possibly could. I mean, he still ended up with a double-double because he's unbelievable. But 2 guys who they're saying, okay, if you can beat us, beat us. They had to give up something to stop other guys. They went out and beat Nebraska that night. So basically, since that announcement, they've played 3 really good games. And I do think there's something to be said for, okay, that's done with that. Storyline's out of there for now. Let's just focus on basketball. And this is, I think sometimes too, when you're part of a team, it's like, this is our last chance playing together. There's some talented guys who've been hooping all their life. So let's go win a few games and at least make a couple memories. And even though it's not a season people around here are going to remember, there's going to be guys who in their 10 years from now, they're going to remember when they beat Ohio State at Ohio State and you ran Penn State out of the gym. So you're trying to make moments like that. And I think they could win a game at, Big Ten too. I mean, they obviously they'll probably be the 14-11 game and maybe you win one there. So they could get to double digits. Didn't look like that could be a possibility.
No, it did not. Even 3 conference wins seemed unlikely at one point this year. So, they got that going for them. All right. From a team that is very hot to a team that is very cold, we will move over to Nebraska baseball now. Michael Bruns, there is probably a fair amount of apprehension from Nebraska fans about a baseball team that starts, 1-6 this year for its first 7 games. They've got 2 doubleheaders coming up in Arlington this weekend. What have you sort of heard? What have you seen when they have been on television? And what have you kind of configured about what is going wrong for the start of this season?
Well, I mean, they're they're not throwing strikes. Their starting pitchers are not throwing strikes. That's where it starts. I mean, when your weekend guys aren't getting you through the second inning, that you're not going to win many games doing that. And offensively, this was always going to be a team, I think, that was going to need some time to gel. And you're seeing that. I mean, you're seeing a lot of strikeouts, guys pressing. I think anytime you have a lineup that's shifting a lot, that shows to me a coach that's still trying to figure out who goes where and who can handle what roles. And I think that's kind of where this team still is. So it's a tough start. I mean, I think you have to kind of resist the urge to make huge sweeping pronouncements about this team 7 games in, but certainly this is not the start that anybody would have wanted. I mean, you schedule a team like TCU to get a win or two and help you come NCAA tournament time, and Nebraska just hasn't been competitive in a lot of its games, and I think that's been the biggest surprise is that you can handle getting beaten by a top 25 team, but just looking like you have no business being on the same field at times, that's a concern.
Absolutely. What have you seen from some of the new faces that entered this program with a little bit of excitement just through these first 8 games so far, or 7 games?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dawson McCarville, the Grand Canyon transfer, I think he's going to be a part of the weekend rotation. I still think that's TBD on what that looks like once they start playing conference games. Trying to think who else that would be. I mean, you lose Jake Buns. That hurts. You're going to have to rely on some younger guys in the bullpen that maybe you weren't planning on having to. Core Jackson was a guy that I think they were very high on. I think that he's a guy that just kind of needs at bats. I mean, that's the tough part is that you're in some spots you're pretty young and pretty inexperienced. The outfield is one area where I think that they were going to need some guys to step up and play well early, and they haven't gotten enough consistency there. So it's just one of those things where I feel like they're almost. It feels like guys are kind of looking around, waiting for somebody else to make a play or get a big out or a key hit or something like that, and it just hasn't happened yet. And I think the coaching staff, based on what I was told coming out of the fall and kind of what they were expecting, I think they've been a little surprised at the difficulty throwing strikes from the starting pitching. So we'll see if they can kind of right the ship down in Texas this weekend. But the non-con starts, or the midweek games start up. You're only a couple of weeks away from the start of Big Ten play. So as much as you want to say, well, don't worry about it, I mean, you're kind of at the point now where guys need to start playing well, because I suck at math. You're about an eighth of the way through the season already. So it's time to play some baseball.
What's your level of surprise that Kobe Gomez has just come out and swinging a hot stick right now? I mean, he was pretty up and down as a hitter when we saw him as a freshman. Obviously, that was many moons ago, but pretty fast start. Obviously, just 7 games, but hitting 400 right now.
Yeah, and I mean, if you remember, I mean, he had a long swing his freshman year, and if he connected, it was going out somewhere. And the problem was he didn't connect enough. And you have to give him credit. I mean, he wasn't planning on being in the lineup until probably December. He hadn't picked up a bat in a couple of years. And, he just, I think a lot of it, the credit goes to Colby for, just simplifying his approach. I think that's how Nebraska does it now, and allows those guys to swing a little bit more freely and not be in their heads so much. But I mean, he's been probably the most notable bright spot in the lineup. I mean, he started out down in the lineup the first weekend, and then they had him batting cleanup by the time they left Texas. So maybe that's one of the few bright spots in the lineup so far for him. And I think too, he's a guy that you're going to have to get a little bit more leadership out of, just based on his experience. He's one of the few guys that have been through it.
Absolutely. Both of you guys happen to be wearing your respective Major League Baseball team hats right now. Is this just a show of solidarity, given that we might not see these teams play for at least a month or so?
I don't know. It was the hat that was just out for me. I'm really ticked off about that whole thing and Rob Manfred. But I knew Bruns would sport his A's hat, and I thought I had to bring the heat with my Twins. I have the old school. This is like 91 Twins, the old M instead of the TC.
Yeah, I had to look at it a little bit to see if you were just wearing like a Mizuno hat or something.
Yeah, people get confused on that.
Was thrown on it a little bit, but good to see that you're still repping the 91 Twins. Where does that rank amongst your favorite sports teams in your history?
Near in the top three. The game 6 of the 91 World Series, like if you're ask someone what's your favorite game of a team that you root for, it's probably game 6, 91 World Series. I was 10 years old. Kirby Puckett catches a ball at the fence, jumping up, hits a home run to win it. Jack Buck says, "We'll see you tomorrow night." That's as good as it gets.
Nice. Brunch, you have any thoughts on the 91 World Series?
I remember the only thing I really remember was there was a picture that ran in Sports Illustrated, and I forget who was the catcher on that team.
Brian Harper. Yeah.
But maybe it was the Braves catcher was like on his head. Like there was a collision at home plate and somebody was like basically, head on the ground, feet up in the air. And like, that was the image that they captured. That was pretty much the only thought I have of the 91 World Series. Do they still have that recording that you can like sit in the chair and stuff at Target Field?
Yeah. By the way, that was the Dazzle man, Dan Gladden, I believe, who ran over the Braves catcher.
That's right.
If I'm thinking of the right picture.
Yeah.
And they do have that. There's a beyond center field for Midwesterners who go up to Target Field. There is a thing where if anybody walks by it, it's like a sensor, and Jack Buck says, "We'll see you tomorrow night." The problem is if you sit in this little group of seats, which I've done before, you just hear it like 10,000 times over the course of 3 hours. So don't sit in in those seats if you can figure out where that is.
The last time we were up there for an A's Twins game, BC just kept walking me by that sensor. He's like, "Get your grain belt. We're walking by the sensor." we were there for about 90 minutes, just walking back and forth.
Was that the first time the Twins and the A's traded Sam Fold back and forth during the same game, or?
I don't remember.
We weren't even we weren't coworkers yet either.
No, that was the only thing I remember from that. Well, we're getting off topic here. Was this A's fan that was keeping meticulous book out in the outfield, and he had like the best Raleigh Fingers mustache. He looked like pretty much what you would expect a hipster A's fan to look like.
We still text about that guy, Brunson and I, on occasion. Like, what's he up to?
Yeah.
How's he feeling about this A's game right now?
He would definitely have scored that an error. He gives no leeway.
You guys have your own personal "Where Are They Now"?
That's him.
Random guy in the outfield with a mustache.
Yeah.
Nice. I can respect that. All right. Now that we've finished the 91 Twins portion of the podcast, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to leave the people with today?
No one's around anymore.
Does Nebraska basketball get their third road win in a row on No-Sit Sunday in Madison?
Do you think it'll be a no-sit Sunday in Madison?
I'm sure it'll be a polite passive-aggressive sitting if I know the Midwesterners well in Wisconsin.
Yeah, they played Wisconsin fairly well. I don't know if you guys remember that game this year. It got rescheduled to like 4:00 in the afternoon, and Brad Davison shot like 92% from three for the duration of that contest. Like, I think he almost set their individual record for 3-pointers made or whatever. The team almost set the record for most in a game. If they didn't shoot that well that night, Nebraska actually was able to score on them. They took Davis out of the game for much of that game. Nebraska played them better than what the score or what your memory probably would recall. It's just Wisconsin shot lights out. So if they don't shoot lights out, and Wisconsin's the kind of team that generally it feels like everybody in the conference, regardless of how good or how bad they are, can sort of hang with them on any given night. I think Nebraska will keep it relatively interesting down to the wire.
Yeah, I wouldn't pick Nebraska, but I bet it's a good game. Operation 13 seed is still, I think, hanging out there if Minnesota loses to and Nebraska pulls another upset. So there's that.
Well, the real question is, do you want the 13 seed where you might be locked into a matchup with Northwestern, who's just somehow been Nebraska's kryptonite in a year in which seemingly everyone's been Nebraska's kryptonite?
What's the old saying? It's really hard to beat a team 3 times in a year. Is that a saying? Do people say that?
I mean, I think they have. I don't know how much they mean it.
It's been said 6 or 7 times in the history of mankind, and you just added another one.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us here at Husker 247. Be sure to check out the coverage on the website. Like I said, we'll have plenty of stories coming from the interviews on Monday. There's a junior day coming up on Saturday. Nebraska's going to have at least a few visitors in from out of state with offers. Could be an interesting day. We'll see who else makes the trek. So we'll have that on the site as well. Anything you guys want to plug? Any specific stories?
We'll be talking on Saturday. We're going to be talking transfer portal with Eric Chenander and the very awkward conversations that take place between coaches trying to find out information about guys that are transferring. So look forward to that.
All right. Excellent. BC?
No, just keep coming. I mean, there's going to be content just flying off the rest. I mean, people just need to come to the site. We're going to have stuff all the time.
We're going to have stuff all the time. Excellent.
There you go. Yeah.
That's the pitch from Husker 247. We'll be sure to catch you next time here on the Husker 247 podcast.